Ira, I don't hear you. Okay.
Wade, would you like to proceed without Ira's introduction?
Sorry, did Ira already make an introduction?
Yes, here. No,
I
I.
haven't heard Ira's introduction.
Okay, I've shifted to Wade's screen now.
Okay, thank you, Ira.
So it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend and colleague, Wade Ferguson. Wade serves as Vermillion's non-board executive director and was one of the original members of the steering committee that developed the Vermillion system. He's a project director in the Innovators in Sustainability project, which seeks, among other goals, to distill industry best practices for dissemination in undergraduate business and MBA programs. A business analyst and strategic consultant, Wade has co-authored Vermillion's business and strategic communication plans. Passionate about identifying the drivers of a sustainable economy and promoting real and measurable progress, Wade has collaborated with a number of thought leaders in the corporate social responsibility, environment, social and governance, and NGO communities. Wade is frequently invited to present his insights on full spectrum sustainability at universities and professional conferences, and his well received research papers and reports focus on sustainability analytics and communication strategies. With that, Wade, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Ira. So in the run-up to today's webinar, I've had occasion to review some of the SCC webinars that have already been posted at YouTube. And in the course of doing that, I've witnessed so many different perspectives about how to move the needle, and I've realized how this presentation may help faculty coming from different points of view to find ways to work together to find better paths forward. And that's one of our hopes in doing this. So I'd like to thank the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium and Ira Feldman and Jess Garrier for inviting us and giving us this platform. About a decade ago, Vermillion began research into moral reasoning and behavior. Since then, we've been testing our ideas. We originally did it to optimize the effectiveness of our own programs, not to give presentations on it, but since 2012, we've been accepting invitations to share our findings publicly. That said, we don't get asked to do this presentation every day, so I'll beg forgiveness for the fact that I'm leaning on a script to stay on track. So I'm just going to start by answering a question that's hotly debated right now in sustainability circles. And Vermillion has concluded that it's not enough to tell people about the future we don't want. We must also tell them what future we do want and where the hope is. Too much doom and gloom causes apocalypse fatigue. The human mind can't handle it, and people just tune out. And Vermillion is not the only one to note this, as I'll discuss later. So getting into it now, we hear a lot about promoting sustainable business operations and calls for better consumer behavior. But what will it take to sustain the right behaviors over time? For 2 decades, a lot of reports from solid survey firms said most adults get the risks of unmanaged environmental impacts and risks on social fabrics from unmanaged externalities, and that consumers were ready to adjust lifestyles. And yet it's clear from what people actually do that when they vote as consumers and as citizens, many other factors drive their final decisions. Like many groups, Vermillion wondered why so many surveys got it wrong. It's clear that it's not a straight line between knowing what to do, doing it, and then sustaining that behavior over time. As part of our research, Vermillion watched the responses of many NGOs to this disconnect. Some create tools to help people make better choices. Some groups try to guilt people for shortchanging their grandchildren. Some condemn people for their weakness. Some assume people just need more apocalypse imagery. Anyone that saw the documentary The Fog of War will remember that former U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara discussed his failure during Vietnam to understand and have empathy with the motives of the opponents. He said that many lives could have been saved if they had just tried to empathize with them, not sympathize with them, but to empathize with them and to understand their point of view and what they were really after. So let's try and understand others, not judge them or preach at them. Looking at this list of messages, it was Ray Anderson's quote about taxation without representation on future generations that got me over a decade ago. But if Vermillion's goal was to increase adoption, how could we be sure that message was the best one around which to build public programs? And I'll just put it to Jess. Which one do you think would be most effective for most of the population?
I think the love Mother Earth stands out to me.
Okay. So that one relates to caring, and I think that's a pretty good choice amongst the choices available. So studying which of the messages is most likely to succeed led to a quest to understand the drivers of moral reasoning and behavior. We wanted to know the way people are, not the way we would like them to be. So Vermillion asked psychologists, and as stated, we learned it's not a straight line between knowing what to do, doing it, and then sustaining that behavior over time. And so that's why when sustainability interested faculty and practitioners work on convincing people there's a problem, they often find they're frustrated that people then don't do something about it. Well, if they don't know what to do, then what can they do but sort of stew on their frustration about the situation? So in the next 30 minutes, I'll share a distillation of a decade of research relating to how motivation, morals, and reinforcement relate to behavior, and how NGOs and business leaders can avoid pitfalls and promote success, and therefore how faculty can prepare their students to be the next generation of NGO and business leaders who will avoid those pitfalls. And I'm going to make a disclaimer right now. Since this is a summary, it's also simplified. So don't send me emails about how I neglected to mention your pet human behavioral quirks. Send those emails to Ira. Here's how it breaks down. There are 4 key aspects to sustained human behavior: cognition and moral reasoning, knowing what to do and why, or what should be done and why; motivation, wanting to do it; behavior, actually doing it; and then reinforcement, sustaining that behavior over time. Let's deal first with cognition and motivation. I think we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It says that humans are driven by instinctual, emotional, and intellectual motivations. Maslow's hierarchy tells us that our most basic urge is to satisfy our need for resources and safety, first for ourselves and our families, then for our communities. After that, we start thinking about less immediate concerns like art and beauty. This concept is related to moral reasoning, but it's not the same, since the drive to satisfy economic needs happens at a more basic level than our wish to see ourselves as good people. After a series of needs are satisfied, that's when we want other things, like feeling we're good and moral people, and Kohlberg identified predictable reasoning stages that all people go through as they grow up. They don't skip stages. The first thing to know is that a big change occurs in adolescence, when children begin to understand the importance of society. As children, their moral reasoning was centered on how to be a good boy or good girl to maintain the approval of their support system, which were their parents and classmates. This was self-centered, all about how their moral behavior helped them be liked and sustained. In adolescence, they discovered society. They realized that society sustains their families, friends, and communities. They realized that their good behavior sustains people they've never met, and the actions of people they've never met sustain them. They begin to realize that they need society, and that society is sustained by fairness and justice, and that since others play by the rules, they should too. They're now using society-centric morality for selfish reasons, but they're no longer conscious of the self-centered part. They just think they're acting for the good of society. Kohlberg found 6 predictable stages, 3 in childhood and 3 in adulthood. Going deeper into stage 3 moral reasoning, it's when children believe in an absolute right and wrong, black and white thinking. No shades of gray. It's always good to be nice to others. It's always good to tell the truth, because that's what makes me a good boy who can sustain my nearby relationships. In stage 4, adolescents will come to value doing the right thing most of the time to maintain a functioning society. And when they don't do the right thing, it's still to sustain themselves and society, which leads to a perspective that favors law and order and justice. Without saying it, stage 4 sees law and order and fairness as the 3 dimensions of maintainability. And to them, law and order means sustaining existing power and authority structures. This likely includes free market capitalism, even though that will mean different things in different countries. Kohlberg found that the vast majority of adults remain in stage 4. This fact will be so important later that I'll emphasize it. For the rest of their lives, most adults everywhere are set in stage 4, which is all about doing things that defend society and familiar institutions. To them, it's a virtue to be fair as well as to sustain the economy and obey authority, even when authority is wrong. So remember this too. Fewer than 20% end up moving beyond that. But then Carol Gilligan came along in '82 and pointed out that justice and fairness arguments are fine, but they paint an incomplete picture of humanity. She pointed out that fairness and justice arguments are commonly used by men. But there are other moral codes that women are typically socialized with, namely caring. I think this explains why many more women select careers like nursing and teaching, and why Love Mother Earth plays well with half the population, and why even now many more men enter careers where caring might be seen as a weakness. But even so, both men and women understand caring. Fairness and justice do not explain someone running out onto a frozen lake and laying themselves out flat to rescue someone else's child that's fallen through the ice. For those of you who are familiar with the concept of unjust enrichment, there's nothing fair about that. You don't take time to evaluate whether the kid's parents are being unjustly enriched in not being exposed to the risk of your heroic act. You just do it, and that takes caring. So Gilligan studied caring, the instinctual imperative to look out for the vulnerable among us. Vermillion noticed that securing resources for one's family and community, for the sake of people and prosperity, is seen as caring, but is also at the most basic level in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So for Vermillion, we began to see caring as not only a basic drive, but as a very intense positive emotion, which could potentially be harnessed. And we thought it might be better to associate our programs with that kind of positivity instead of associating them with the negativity of fear motivation in apocalypse imagery, which is unfortunately so often invoked in environmental messaging. National laws and international agreements tend to be framed in the language of common law and case law, which were developed to rely on concepts of justice and fairness. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Kohlberg's model for moral reasoning relied on concepts of fairness and that the majority of NGO appeals to government deal with the unfairness in unmanaged externalities. But it turns out moral individuals who center their behaviors on fairness are easily distracted as soon as they think the other parties are not doing their fair share. And here's a question for Jess again. Jess, how long would you keep paying your phone bill if the phone company stopped giving you service? Maybe Jess isn't here right now. She might have had to step away. How long would any of us keep paying that phone bill? Because it wouldn't be fair. So now consider all the work in ratifying international deals to allow developing regions to operate on different carbon constraints than rich countries. The plans are well-intentioned, but so easily derailed by opponents who offer media an 8-second soundbite that some people would not carry their fair share of the sacrifice with that plan. On the other hand, consider how almost everyone can care for children for decades when it's not fair. When their kids are teens, parents aren't even sure if they're getting through and making a difference. Worse yet, the children rarely appreciate the sacrifice until much, much later. Humans have an innate capacity to endure in the face of unfairness and uncertainty when they have decided they should care for a vulnerable constituency. And consider this. How many community leaders do you know that want to be seen as uncaring? For human beings at a basic level, the desire to care trumps the desire to be fair. It happens automatically, and the impulse to care lasts longer. So when your students are making the case for responsible investing or consuming, or when they're making the case in a company that they've begun working for that it should measure and manage their externalities, in all those cases where someone's success is not measured by one grand gesture, but in the net effect of thousands or hundreds of small actions that can't feasibly be evaluated each time, it's a good strategy to focus on why to care about the impacts on others rather than why something's unfair to others. Save fairness and justice arguments for court cases and big issue government hearings where decisions can be thoughtfully considered by weighing many fairness factors and then codified, monitored, and defended in law. But when success relies on the aggregate of many, many unmonitored activities, and especially when women control consumer spending in 60 to 70% of households, Vermillion believes that caring is the stronger rationale to promote. And if that's right, then the sustainability movement's historical reliance on male-oriented rhetoric is at least part of the reason why there's been a lack of progress on sustainability for over 25 years. People are motivated to be masters of what they do. Psychologists call it mastery motivation, and they want to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So they value tools that will help them have the pleasure of mastery instead of the pain of inadequacy. This links directly to behavior. When people feel good about what they've mastered, they're empowered to take on more difficult challenges, to climb higher mountains. Another researcher figured it out. The three key words are competence, confidence, and commitment. And there's been a great deal of academic research on how they are linked. Competence means knowing why something should be done. Confidence means knowing how to do it safely. And commitment flows from seeing benefits and reinforcement. This leads to a virtuous cycle. When people feel confident in knowing the right things to do and why, and feel confident that it can be done safely and it will actually make a difference, it leads to satisfying outcomes that increase motivation and reinforce the behavior. When we see someone do the same thing over and over, we say, well, that person's committed. They're solid. But as we'll see next, even the best of us are only as solid as our weakest link. So let's apply what we've learned to a big frustration in sustainability communities. Consider when conscious consumers see two products on the store shelf, one with no green label and one with a green label that costs more. Almost everyone knows that many consumers aren't bearing their fair share by paying more, and that's not fair. Now combine that with the model saying a consumer would need to be confident that his actions are safe and will actually make a difference. With the unfairness and uncertainty, many conscious consumers know what they should do, but they still end up buying the cheaper, less responsible product with a pretty clear conscience in order to keep the extra money to better care for their family in the present. In fact, there's an entire subfield of research that looks at how people's assessment of what's appropriate to do drives decisions. Generally, when people see they've failed, and especially when they're condemned for failing, they'll try to improve for a while. But if they see that a task makes little difference or cannot be mastered, they'll look for other things to do. And when the virtuous cycle breaks, motivation disappears, good behavior is interrupted or undermined, but we just think the person isn't committed. Most people who think an action cannot help will conclude it's appropriate to do little or nothing and feel okay about it. This fact has haunted us and really shaped our thinking about what to do differently. And again, Robert McNamara advised us of the benefits of empathy for others, so let's try to understand stage 4, not judge them or preach at them. We spend a lot of time wondering what it would take to build confidence in people that their choices really make a difference. And that wish to empathize and understand these people brought us back to a closer study of Kohlberg's research. So stage 4 believes that if their friend gets an awful haircut but seems proud of it, when asked, it's better to tell a white lie than to hurt the feelings and disrupt the group. We wouldn't want that. And we'll call that the bad haircut dilemma. This begins the process by which stage 4 accepts and even defends imperfect institutions and organizations. Later research suggests that even sustaining sustaining institutions also means sustaining cultural norms and institutional teams, even imperfect cultural norms and teams. So as adults, stage 4 does not want to rock the boat in team settings and even shuns those who bring disruptive or subversive views forward that would change organizational structures too dramatically. This becomes a problem for everyone here and all of your students who will have any role as a change agent. I assume that most people who come to events like this and who are looking for better ways forward are stage 5 or 6 reasoners. So if you've been calling on friends, co-workers, students, or voters to be more willing to rock the boat about industry operations or society, to stage 4, to 80% of voters, you might as well be asking them to try crack. They think, well, sounds kind of dodgy. I won't argue with the person, but I won't try it either. At higher stages, justice and fairness still apply, but in nuanced ways. Where the stage 5 values tolerance for many perspectives and stage 6 sees universal ethical principles as reasons to adhere to values and behaviors, because they're the right thing to do, not because they're the proclamations of a central authority. So when their values align with what cultural norms call for, there's no problem. But when they see the right thing as different from what central authorities say, they are often willing to rock the boat. In technical terms, stage 4 moral reasoners see good citizenship as defending and maintaining existing institutions, even when they are flawed. While stage 5 and 6 moral reasoners see good citizenship as challenging and changing flawed institutions. Think of it another way. Stage 4 sees it as a virtue to defend and maintain flawed institutions, while stage 5 and 6 see it as a virtue to challenge and change flawed institutions. So both sides feel the other is being inappropriate. When we first created this presentation, we fretted over how to visualize this slide. I said we've got to help leaders see that even though the stages look equal here, stage 4 has 80% of the voters and holds 4 times the voting power to keep things as they are, both in a political sense and in an organizational sense. Kohlberg found that people can understand an argument 1 stage above, but not 2. For example, a stage 3 boy will say it's always good to be nice to others and always good to tell the truth. When his older sister, a stage 4, tries to mentor him about the benefits of telling a white lie to resolve the bad haircut dilemma, the stage 3 boy can process that. He isn't convinced, but he sees how his sister might feel that way, so he thanks her and remains sure he's always going to tell the truth. It's only when the boy runs into the bad haircut dilemma enough times to see the values collide that his cognitive dissonance provokes a self-adjustment to stage 4. Similarly, someone at stage 5 can mentor someone at stage 4, which won't convince them, but may prepare them for their own breakthrough, which will only occur in about 15% of people. But stage 3 cannot understand an argument 2 stages removed. Neither can stage 4. The ideas sound more than inappropriate. They sound crazy. They sound subversive. How long do any of us listen to crazy people? And I'm going to try Ira this time. Ira, how long do you listen to people who you judge to be crazy?
I give everybody a chance. So you're asking the wrong person.
I guess that's probably because you're a stage 6 moral reasoner and you want, or stage 5 and above, and you're open to other people's perspectives.
That's right.
You know, for most people, they listen to people they judge to be crazy about as long as they tolerate static on a TV set. If activists rant and rave outside our doors with picket signs, if they follow us around and preach at us, are we more open to listening? And in the context of faculty, if a recent grad joins a company and rants about her employer's failings, is she more likely to be promoted into a decision-making role that can actually affect those operations? So 80% of the time, no. She would do better by communicating to her colleagues and her leadership team that if the company measures and manages its impact, it's going to be a more resource-efficient company that can save money and get more buy-in and more brand loyalty from its customers to make a stronger company over time. And so it should be no surprise in the absence of narratives like that when community groups identify problems in society and then communicate the problems and solutions using moral arguments that make sense to them, they often find their ideas fall on deaf ears without really understanding why. For better messages to be designed, these groups must accept the profound political, market, and organizational influence of Stage 4 reasoners and learn to speak their language. We must show Stage 4 how what we want to do is appropriate because it defends important institutions rather than trying to change their minds about morality. This communication challenge isn't just a problem for sustainability advocates and progressives. It's also a problem for libertarian conservatives who've been calling for course corrections for decades. When libertarians talk about personal responsibility, less government intrusion in our personal lives, and bad central bank policy, they're complaining about the risks to the people and prosperity dimensions of sustainable development, and they're taking on a series of federal institutions. They sound a lot like Stage 6. Some people paint them as kooks, and some TV networks won't let them into the debates. How familiar does that sound? So that's just one of the reasons why Vermillion recommends taking a nonpartisan approach to sustainability. If we take the time to empathize and understand the positions of other groups, we find there are a lot of allies to be made among principled conservatives who see value in stable ecosystem services, things like reliable fresh water and weather patterns, a healthy labor force, all of those things in service of a sustainable economy. We can work with these people, and I hope you will welcome them into your work too. I'm going to make a note of caution here before we continue. One time when we showed this presentation, a local keener interjected with an expression of his pride. He was feeling much smarter in his principled Stage 6 perspective than his Stage 4 neighbors, who didn't seem to get the importance of making these changes. So Vermillion had to correct him. Stage 6 people are not necessarily better than Stage 4. No one here needs much time to think of names in the history books of Stage 6 reasoners who had some pretty crazy ideas for how to form a more perfect society. Stage 4 reasoners are a counterbalance to that. Most of the time they ensure that only the best ideas get through, and the aberrant examples of history are the exception, not the rule. So in the end, what does all this mean? Well, to our dismay, it means this. In everyday terms, Stage 4 sees it appropriate, even a virtue, to go down with the ship. Preaching, using guilt, telling them they're catastrophically wrong doesn't get them to tune in more. It causes the largest group of consumers and voters to tune out. So as stated, Vermillion is not alone in noting this. I'm aware that Deb Rowe did a webinar recently for the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium where she talked about the need to avoid too much doom and gloom narrative. So many of you here will agree with at least one of the messages on line 5 or 6. But does either message have a hope of engaging mainstream morals and 80% of adults? By the time people come to their first sustainability conference, they are probably already at Stage 4 on this ladder. And when they are ready to take more fundamental action, they often forget their own journey to understanding Stages 5 and 6. By then, they are out of touch with how 80% think, but they do know about the urgency to act, and they're anxious to get the word out. But the more anxious and adamant they come across, the more likely they are to be seen as crazy, counterculture, subversive anarchists who are easy to dismiss. We think this explains the tragedy that followed the Brundtland Commission's work. Whether or not they knew about Kohlberg's stages, they correctly positioned the issues for mainstream persuasion. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So the first clause, meeting the needs of the present, shows support for sustaining society. After Brundtland, a number of well-intentioned groups took the phrase sustainable development and created other narratives that abandoned that part that would resonate with 80% of voters and consumers, which has led to reduced political and market support. So the opportunity cost of unilaterally changing Brundtland to suit their needs and then simply pushing harder when that didn't work might be the progress that never happened. So now let's take another look at the slide with some of the most common eco messages. I want to validate again that Jess, who has seen this presentation once before, sort of zeroed in on the love aspect of Love Mother Earth, which is relating to caring. However, as Vermillion looked at all of these in light of our findings, we saw not a word about caring for people, prosperity, or society. And we saw that many messages rely on apocalypse imagery and unfairness arguments to inspire action, without doing much to increase 80% of society's sense of why they should act, how they should act, or the benefits in ways that would resonate with them. Messages like these make many independent voters vulnerable to thinking sustainability advocates care more about planet than people, and that they're out of touch with mainstream values such as supporting people and communities. So maybe none of these messages is really optimally suited to encourage retail consumers, investors, voters, and the managers of the organizations your students will join to change their behavior. As discussed earlier, people who think inaction cannot make a difference will feel okay about not doing it. They won't see it as a moral failure not to do that thing, even while they might want to do it in an ideal setting. This creates a real dilemma for the sustainability space, where we must tell people about the risks from poor workplace safety, from assaults on ecosystem services, and from poor governance. But if we paint too dire a picture, instead of inspiring action, we can actually cause people to feel helpless and to refrain from going further to improve their workplace and personal choices. Not to mention causing some people to think we're crazy and tune out. So I'm about to talk about a set of messaging tools for your toolkit. Just like you would use a hammer for some needs and a drill for others, you should pick the right messages for the setting. Vermillion recommends that if you're passionate about progress, you need to be like ducks on the water. You shouldn't just talk about the future you don't want. Talk about the future you do want. You should talk reasonably about sustaining families, communities, and society, along with the risks to businesses and society with less reliable ecosystem services. You should promote knowledge of what to do better as workers and consumers, maybe by encouraging support for local groups. I mean, in Calgary, where I am, there's a group called Green Calgary, and there's another called Viable Calgary that work different sides of the dimensions of sustainable development. And I'm sure you folks have similar groups in your own communities. And tell people how the things that those groups teach makes a real difference. Then you should send the message that you support and reward good behavior by working at and buying from the more responsible companies. So for our part, at Vermillion, one of our more significant ongoing programs is the Innovators in Sustainability Project. In it, we feature business innovators who are reshaping industry operations for the good of people, planet, and community prosperity. Our sponsors and supporters make it possible. We think it's a good example of what we need more of, promoting leadership based on real and measurable progress, because that's what Stage 4 moral reasoners want and need to see. And then the lessons learned and the data derived from studying the innovators forms the basis for Vermillion's collaboration with various groups, including the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, for the good of curriculum development and faculty development. So that's what we do in communities where Vermillion operates, and we encourage you likewise to do things in your own communities to promote awareness of real success, not just real risks. This means being flexible, not black and white like Stage 3 would be. Justice arguments don't work with the people that vote governments into power and keep them there. Most times, take justice arguments out of your toolkit and use them only when you're dealing with governments and courts. The rest of the time, we think that by calling on people to care for people, planet, and prosperity, the three dimensions of a sustainable society, we engage with most adults in the way that's already consistent with their values, which reduces the steps and time to move society to a constructive shared understanding for a plan of action. Next, we can make the case that caring about workplace safety and environmental waste, both here and abroad, is a tool for keeping taxes down and prosperity up, which is better for your families and society today and tomorrow. That's how to help most people see that you share their values, so they want to know you better instead of keeping their distance. Over time, repeating these messages will make it normal to see better behavior as an act of caring that mainstream people do, not an act of justice, which should make people much more likely to endure in key behaviors towards the future we want. And here we have a real-world case study of the effectiveness of the caring narrative versus other strategies. So PCL Construction is a global construction company, and they had attempted a number of strategies to improve workplace safety that human resources consultants had suggested, like, offering bonuses to the managers of work sites where there were fewer injuries, or, people get rewarded with iPads for the fewest lost time injuries, and, or the company's going to be more profitable, be able to pay out more bonuses, or the narrative that, we'll be more responsible, and, that's a good thing for our company to be. And at the end of all, some experimentation with a number of strategies of that type, they tried a different one, and it was, hey, we want to make sure that our people get home safe to their families at the end of the day. And as soon as they adopted that narrative, they saw a significant drop-off in lost time injuries. And, I really think this is a classic example of how the narrative of caring can trump so many other approaches to this and be cost-effective for companies to implement. So once again, I'd like to thank the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium and Ira and Jess for helping me bring this information to you. You can download a copy of our summary resource for better messages under the resource section of Vermillion websites. I know that Vermillion Institute looks forward to working with the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, Ira and Jess, and maybe many of you to develop even more effective and emotionally salient messages to better realize the future we want. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of you here for caring to find and use better messages for sustainable behavior in your workplaces and in your classrooms for your students. And with that, I'll turn the floor back over to Ira.
Thank you, Wade, for that insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We have a handful of questions in the chat box. There's still an opportunity for all on the line to put their questions and comments into the chat box. I will review those and convey those to Wade for his response. And now we can move into our